when I was talking about the syllabus, I feel like I kept going, wait, we're not going to talk about that. That's because we're going to talk about a few things that are like not syllabus, but important right now. So this is like my guide to, even though I said all you have to do is show up to get an A, this is like my guide to getting an A in this class, and it hopefully just some like good working habits in general. So the first thing I'm going to say, and I think I try to do this as much as possible, which is bring value to the class when you show up. And what I mean by that is, like, we're doing this thing together. Like, it's not about any one of you or like about me. It's like we're creating something together, even if we're doing the projects ourselves, and your physical presence in the room adds or detracts from the vibe. Like, we've all had like the person that just sucked the energy out of the room because like they were, even if it was as simple as they were beating themselves up over their shitty work all the time, and of course their work wasn't shitty, it's just they were beating themselves up over their work, then they'd feel shitty, and then like it would just like be a kind of ruined situation. Some simple ways to do this, I think. The first one is there's a note in the syllabus like, turn your phones to silent or blah, blah, blah. I gotta remember to be better about this, but I just think put the phones to do not disturb. The reason I think we should do this is there's like 3 phone calls in the entire world I could get where I would be like shit and get up and leave. Like, there's only a couple things that would be so catastrophic that I would be like, class is done, I'm out. But even that said, they'd be so catastrophic that if I didn't find out about them for an hour, it's not like I could do anything anyway. But there's like a million things that if I found out about them, they could immediately ruin my night, even though I can't deal with them at all. So just a thing to think about. Like a very grandiose example. Remember when Kim Kardashian got robbed and Kanye found out on stage and shut the show down and flew to Paris? He could have waited an hour. It wouldn't have made any difference in the world to any part of this situation other than ruining a bunch of people's nights, right? You still have to go to Paris. It's still a million miles away. So, like, think about that. Like, how many things would actually be so important that you would be like, I gotta get up and leave, and then could you affect them anyway? And like, that sounds bad, but it's like, I'm thinking like the reasons are like, my kids are in the hospital. Well, if they're in the hospital, hopefully they're being taken care of, and me not being there in an hour is not going to be the end of whatever, my life, their life, etc. And I'm bad about it, but like, I know I have to be better about it. So that's the thing to think about. The other one I think is really simple, like get your work done. I know that's stupid, but it totally affects the vibe overall, because there's this weird thing that happens in the school environment, which is like, we act like we are in an office working together, and when someone's not contributing, it's irritating, and it's even worse, lesson for someone if you do this, if you're really harsh in critiques, like, and then you don't show up with stuff. You're the worst human being in the world if you do that. So, like, get the work done. And if you're gonna like critique people's stuff, because we still want to hear from you, then make sure that you are a little bit extra nice, since you're not basically earning your keep in the room. And the last one I would say is take advantage of the fact that we're here, and everyone in this room in some capacity is like working as a designer or just has experiences of value for you to draw on. That's probably the most important part of showing up to like a physical on-campus situation, is the fact that you can ask questions and get answers like super frictionless. I think that's the most important thing that I do. Like, I think that me being an open book and being available is the absolute most important, and then me trying to like give you some skills or strategies for making work, that's like the second most important. Because even me being an open book, gives you enough information to be like, oh, that guy's really stupid. I better be careful about like what he's about. But it lets me do things that like we couldn't do online. Like there's so many questions that if you asked me them online, I'd be like, oh, can we just talk on the phone? Because like I don't want to type up an essay to deal with it. But there's any number of things that the worst case scenarios, I'd be like, yeah, I'm not comfortable answering that question right now. So take advantage of that, and then take advantage of each other in that regard. And then the other thing is like, it's those little things anyway that contribute to the overall bond. So that's one thing. The next thing, as we go into our project, don't worry about your portfolio. Don't worry about your portfolio in regards to mid-program reviews. If any of you get up to show your portfolio and tell me it all sucks, I really don't care, because you don't, if all you're capable of is sucky work, let's roll with it. So don't worry about your portfolio. And in regards to this class, don't do that. Because the thing that people say is like, they'll be at the beginning of a project and then they'll start talking about their portfolio. And the thing is like, it's my job to worry about your portfolio. That's why I've assigned the project. That's why I've structured the way I've structured it. That's why I've like brought in hopefully new challenging processes to work with. Because I actually am concerned about your portfolio. And my hope is that in doing so, you can stop thinking about it and just focus on working. So don't make decisions, especially creative decisions, where you're thinking about what your work is gonna look like 5 months from now. You will hobble the work. It always happens. I know that sounds weird, but I really think like the way to get somewhere is you just deal with where you're at. And you deal with like the next step in front of you, and you don't sit there like, you know, if you're on the highway and you're going in the right direction, you don't obsessively go like, I don't know, are we going to California? I feel like maybe we're not. And someone's like, we've been going west for a day. I promise you, California's that way, or whatever way west is. Like worrying about your portfolio it's like agonizing over shit that you can't control, and it's being neurotic, and it doesn't help. And that said, when we get to this project, only focus on the next step. The people who've had me before, they won't know the process that we're doing. Actually, you do know the process that we're doing this semester, now that I think about it, but you haven't done it with me. I engineer out step by step what we're doing. The reason that I do that is because it's kind of like if you're making a cake. The first time you need to follow the recipe, and then you start adjusting based on like what works, what doesn't work, your oven's screwed up and the heat's uneven, whatever it is. But you don't just go like, hey, how do you make a cake? And then someone goes like, oh, well, there's like eggs and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh shit, okay, cool. And you start throwing stuff in. Like you go step by step. The process that we're gonna use, it's not the process, it's a process. My hope is that by making you run through it in an actual project in a non-academic way, that bits and pieces of it are gonna work for you, and then you can carry them forward with new work. Worst case scenario though is that like, well no, best case scenario is you're like, holy shit, this process rules. And then like that's your deal from there on out. But the point of doing this thing like step by step is to be able to really break down the design process. We did this really extremely last semester. This semester is less extreme, but it mirrors professional work, like my experience is working in an agency specifically, while maybe being like a more ideal version, because it's like not someone breathing down your neck to turn it around in a day. But for it to work, you have to do step 1, then step 2, then step 3. And similar to worrying about the portfolio, every time somebody screws up this project, they do the same thing. They're up here, maybe they're not even up here yet. They're like in the research phase, and they start talking about something like, well, if I do a film festival about movies where window shades figure prominently, I'm just not sure I'll be able to design for that. But that's stupid, because that's not your problem today. Your problem today is to figure out, is that even a genre of movies that makes any sense whatsoever? And if it is, what are those movies? And then what else can you tell us about them? And like, what other kind of research? The design process is another step down the way. You shouldn't be thinking about it. Like literally, I want you to be a blank slate every week. The only thing that matters is the stuff you did the week before, because that's gonna propel you forward. But like if you have like what seems like an asinine idea for a film festival, like Alex Conover's, his was about movies where digging holes featured prominently, which is like a ridiculous and fantastic idea. But he could have been like, oh, I don't know, like they all have different kinds of rocks, and I don't know how to design around rocks. That's stupid. Like, one, if that's actually a problem, that means you don't have a design process. It means that what happens is you have a project to do, the form of content, and that triggers a response in you because you know something about that content or you have a pre-existing idea about it. So if you can design for the nonprofit art gallery, but you can't design for Porsche, that's not because Porsche is hard to design for, it's because you have no design process and all that's been happening is you've been getting lucky. Like, oh, I could do this, or you've been ripping off other people's work by being on trend or whatever. But the point is like, if you have a process, you can design for anything, and the only issue is, will you design for anything? But the actual process of designing the branding for a military defense system and a coffee cup, the process is exactly the same. It's about steps taken in a certain sequence that allow you to research, to analyze, or to organize, to analyze, then to like have an ideation method and blah, 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 blah. And then you end up somewhere that makes sense. If you can't do that, you don't have a process. You just you get lucky. And eventually you won't get lucky, and that's when you get creative block, which is like a bullshit thing that doesn't exist. Or that's when you end up screwing up your career because you think that there's a difference between all these things, but they're just content. And that once you'll know when you have a process, when it doesn't freak you out to design something that you know nothing about. If it freaks you out, you don't have a process yet. And you're just going off of whatever's rattling around in your head. So one step at a time. That was a long-winded way of saying that. Like every week it's gonna be really clear what I want you to go out and do. Do that thing, and if your idea is stupid, well, one, you're gonna have lots of ideas, so it doesn't matter if you have a stupid idea. But if your idea is stupid but you love it, don't worry about what it might look like. That's a problem for a month from now. It's not a problem today. This one's weird. Get your shit together. So, what does that mean? If you procrastinate, you need to figure out how to solve that. And the first thing to do is to stop thinking that you're ever gonna stop procrastinating. Like, the youngest person in this room is old enough to know, like, you're not changing. You're straight. Like, this is what you're doing. Like, this is the situation. If you procrastinate now, you're always gonna keep procrastinating. What you need to figure out is what is the situation that causes you to procrastinate? Because like I procrastinate on lots of stuff, like taxes, which makes sense. Who wants to do taxes? Taxes and making a drawing are two totally different activities. If I'm procrastinating on drawing, something is fucked up in my life. If you're procrastinating on doing work that you care about and that you love, something is messed up in the way that you're working. It could be you're obsessing with the end goal of like, this has to be good, it has to be a portfolio piece, it needs to be cutting edge, blah, blah, blah. It needs to not be cutting edge, it needs to be minimalist, whatever it is. And then all that pressure is making everything else in the world look better. Like when you're procrastinating, that's what you're doing. Like you're creating a situation where things you have to do seem so sucky that you go and do other things. And the reason I bring this up is like I went to this school and I procrastinated the whole last year. Then I had freelance clients and I procrastinated on their shit. And I basically, unless people were breathing down my neck and threatening to fire me, not that they did, I was procrastinating, or I had creative block, because they're both basically symptoms of the same thing. The context that you're working in is messed up, and that's how it manifests itself. Now, I procrastinate on all kinds of stuff, but that stuff is not fun and I don't want to do it, so I just put it off to the last minute. Like taxes, sucks, who cares? Medical insurance, sucks, not dealing with it. But like graphic design, fucking awesome. Like I am doing that. And that's the same thing I used to procrastinate on, because I created a situation where it was no longer fun. It was no longer gratifying because I was so stressed out about how I should be working. How come like I can't make this kind of stuff? Like I really should do more of like a certain style, or why don't I have a style? All of those kinds of questions, they all derail you. It all kind of comes back to that idea of like, don't worry about your portfolio. Don't worry about like goals. I don't really mean that the way it sounds, but I mean like, if you want to work for book designers, then design books, but don't be obsessed with the kind of books. Like don't be like, oh, I need to do minimalist books that are always gray on this page, whatever it might be. So that's like the first thing. Like, if you procrastinate, ask yourself why you're doing it. And like, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but like, wait, did we have a class with? We were all supposed to be in a class with a person last semester who dropped out, who procrastinated constantly and was obsessed with excellence. Those two things were related, and it fucked up every project he worked on. He didn't procrastinate because he was lazy. He worked harder than all of us, it seemed like, except his work was to be stressed out and upset all the time and killed the vibe in the classroom frequently. So think about that. Think about the context that you work in. For some of you, if you have a TV on in the background, you can't work at all. And that's important to acknowledge, like, don't have a TV on. But like, for me, when I do most creative activities, with a few exceptions, I have the TV on in the background. I look at it like this. If the work goes crappy, at least I got to watch The Walking Dead. If the work goes awesome, I can always watch The Walking Dead later. But I like set it up, it's a win-win situation. This is why I don't procrastinate anymore. If I'm working on a drawing, I make sure the drawing is sitting somewhere where I can get to it and work on it for 2 minutes at a time. All of that stuff ensures that I don't procrastinate. If I needed 45 minutes to work on it, well, I would have to switch up the scenario. But it's all in the context. If you struggle with this stuff, like look at this situation that you're creating for yourself, or if you can't find enough time to work, start to ask yourself like, okay, is there ways for me to small chunk my workout more to where I could work in 10-minute bursts? Because you can always find another 10 minutes, but you can't always find an hour, right? There's always 10 minutes hiding somewhere. And if you're like struggling with like those bigger chunks, figure out if you can work with the smaller ones. And just like contextually get stuff to where like it's just easy to start working and it's like works with you. The weird thing is like I don't have my laptop right now, so it's harder to do design work, like because I want to sit on the couch and just make stuff or like do whatever it is I do. But on the other hand, for a lot of like the creative stuff I do, it really didn't matter anyway, because 90% of it I did on my phone because I don't like friction. I'm like lazy. If I like music, I just want to plug in headphones and sit down at the kitchen table. I don't want to like have an app and a keyboard and all that bullshit. But that's like contextually what works. So like start to look at that. If you struggle and you think at some point I didn't used to struggle, what were you doing differently then? Bring that back. Instead of assuming you need to change, like change as much stuff around you and the way that you're working, and then you'll get back to wherever it is you need to be. You might just have to change your thinking. Maybe you were really chill and easygoing 10 years ago, and it was really easy to just make a ton of stuff, and now you overthink everything, and you don't make any stuff, and you're like, you know what, I was doing a lot better when I made stupid stuff and like wasn't thinking about it. And it's cool, like maybe you're dumb. Like I tend to think I'm dumb, like I make dumb shit, and it's cool, because I'm happy, because I'm productive. Last thing, educate yourself via your passions. So productive procrastination, find something to where like you can keep learning about stuff that is exciting to learn about so that you're not procrastinating. So if you're really into graphic design, but when you think about the idea of looking at like design history, you go like, oh, I really should look at more design history. That is a surefire sign that you should not do that. Because like, when you say the word should, it's almost always a sign that you feel compelled or forced to do something. So think about the stuff that like you're excited about, and then just like, you don't even have to read a book. Like you could go to the library, get 3 graphic design history or like monographs, whatever. Bring them home and just leave them somewhere, context, where you can glance at them. You know what I'm saying? Like you don't have to read a fucking book. I know that sounds bad, but like let's say you're like into like marketing. Like I was thinking about this. My basement's filled with books. Like I'll be like, oh, that book looks cool, and I'll go buy some book, and I'll read 10 pages of it. If I got something out of the 10 pages, as far as I'm concerned, that was $20 well spent. Like, I don't beat myself up like, oh, you know, I really should have read the last chapter of that book. No, I shouldn't have. The part I cared about was in the first 10 pages. It's just set it up to where like you can take in stuff in a way that's fun. Don't set your life up to where it's a competition between doing stuff that's good for you and Netflix. Find ways of making all the stuff that's good for you be kind of on the same level as the Netflix. Even if it's like, keep a stack of books near wherever you typically watch TV. Worst case scenario, you ignore the books and you watch The Walking Dead. Best case scenario, you'll have to rewatch that episode because you were like so into looking through these like books or whatever it is that you have going on. But do the like the productive procrastination thing. It's so good. And don't do the should thing. Like, you don't have to give a shit about the history of graphic design. You don't have to give a shit about theory. You don't have to give a shit about communications. Like, you don't have to care about any of these things. Go after the things that like are just exciting to you, that you'll kind of zone out on, so that you're feeding your work in a way that's not making more work, because you all have enough stuff going on. Like, you don't need to make any more work for yourself. That is it. Do that, get an A, be happier, and hopefully more productive. Does that make sense? Okay, sweet.